After Jesus opened the eyes of Bartimaeus on the road outside Jericho, the journey toward Jerusalem continued under the weight of everything that was coming. Bartimaeus had cried out from the roadside, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus had stopped for a blind beggar the crowd tried to silence. Within the same city, another man needed the same mercy, though his need lay hidden beneath wealth and a reputation that had closed every respectable door in Jericho against him. Luke introduces him in a single compressed sentence. "And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich." The Greek word behind chief among the publicans, architelones, appears nowhere else in the New Testament, and it tells us Zacchaeus was no roadside toll gatherer. He was the contractor who ran the tax operation for the district, the man to whom the ordinary collectors answered, and a portion of everything they gathered flowed upward into his hands. Jericho was exactly the kind of city that produced such a man. Herod the Great had rebuilt it lavishly and kept a winter palace there, and the city sat astride the trade route that crossed the Jordan from Perea and climbed toward Jerusalem. Its balsam groves yielded a perfume prized across the empire, its date palms were famous enough to appear on coins, and pilgrims, merchants, and caravans moved through it in a constant stream. Wherever that much commerce flowed, Rome demanded its share, and Rome gathered its share through men like Zacchaeus. The system he served explains the hatred he carried. Rome did not employ tax collectors directly, but sold collection rights to contractors, who recovered their investment and made their fortune from whatever they could extract above the required quota. The arrangement invited abuse at every level, and a chief publican profited from every act of overreach committed by the men beneath him. To his neighbors, Zacchaeus was worse than greedy. He was a collaborator, a Jew grown rich by squeezing his own people on behalf of the power that occupied their land. His very name deepened the insult, for Zacchaeus comes from the Hebrew Zacchaeus, meaning pure or innocent, and every person in Jericho who knew what the name meant could taste the irony of the man who wore it. His wealth had purchased position without purchasing a single friendship the gospel bothers to record. People no doubt stepped aside when he passed through the market, but they stepped aside from him the way men avoid something unclean. In the eyes of the city, Zacchaeus was precisely the kind of man a holy teacher should refuse to acknowledge. Yet when Jesus came through Jericho, Zacchaeus wanted to see him. Luke records the desire in the plainest possible terms. He sought to see Jesus who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. Nothing in the text says he intended to follow Jesus, or that he had already repented, or even that he hoped to exchange a word with him. Grace often begins that far back with nothing more than a restless curiosity about whether this Jesus is truly who the reports claim, and that small opening proved to be enough. The crowd stood in his way, and there is a quiet echo of the Bartimaeus story in that detail. Outside the city, the people had tried to silence a beggar with their voices. Inside it, they blocked a tax collector with their bodies. Whether by accident or by intention, the crowd once again stood between a sinner and the Savior, and a man of Zacchaeus' standing had every reason to protect his dignity and go home rather than be seen scrambling for a view like a boy at a parade. Instead, he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree, and the detail rings true to anyone who knows the tree. The sycamore of the Jordan Valley is the fig mulberry, a tree with a short trunk and wide, low lateral branches, one of the easiest climbs in the region, even for a small man in a rich man's robes. What it offered in access, it cost in dignity. A chief publican perched among the leaves above a public road had surrendered every pretense of importance, and for once in his life, being seen mattered less to Zacchaeus than seeing. Picture him there above the road as the procession approached, hidden in the foliage with the people who despised him passing below. the disciples moving with the crowd, still learning what kind of king they followed, and at the center of it all, Jesus, walking toward the city where rejection and the cross were waiting. Zacchaeus believed he was the one doing the searching, but when Jesus came to the place, he stopped beneath the branches, looked up, and called the hidden man by name. "Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house." Jesus asked no one to explain who the man was or what he had done. He began with no accusation, and the invitation he extended went far beyond a word of greeting, because in that culture to lodge and eat in a man's house was to extend him fellowship before the whole community. The word "must" carries its own weight in Luke's Gospel, where the same language of divine necessity attaches to the sufferings of the Son of Man. Staying at this particular house was not a courtesy that occurred to Jesus in passing. It belonged to the purpose that had brought him down that road. Zacchaeus came down quickly and received him joyfully, and that joy tells us something had already shifted inside the man. He had climbed the tree hoping to catch a distant glimpse, and now the Son of God was walking toward his front door. The man whom public hatred had shut out of the community was being personally summoned into fellowship. The crowd did not share the joy. Luke says, "And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner." Their offense was not manufactured out of nothing, and we should be honest about that. Zacchaeus' fortune had almost certainly been built through a system that wounded real households, and standing in that crowd there may well have been farmers, laborers, and widows who had paid more than they owed because men like him demanded it. The people were right to recognize sin where sin existed. Their error was believing that sin had placed Zacchaeus beyond the reach of the one passing through their city. Then, inside the moment no public insult had ever produced, Zacchaeus stood and spoke to the Lord. "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold." Half of a chief publican's fortune was an enormous surrender, and the second promise cut even deeper than the first, because fourfold restitution was the harshest standard the law of Moses knew. Exodus required a thief to restore 4 sheep for a stolen sheep, but a man who voluntarily confessed his fraud owed only the principal plus a 5th part added. Zacchaeus could have claimed the gentler provision and satisfied the letter of the law. Instead, he sentenced himself under the severest one, and in doing so he guaranteed that his repentance would reach his ledgers, his household, and every person he had wronged. He was not purchasing salvation with the money. He was showing its fruit, because the old life could not remain comfortable once Jesus had entered the house. Jesus answered with a declaration that restored more than a conscience. "This day is salvation come to this house, for so much as he also is a son of Abraham." The crowd saw a sinner, and a sinner he was, but Jesus named him a son of Abraham, a lost member of the covenant family being brought home. His past still mattered, and it mattered enough that restitution was necessary, and the poor of Jericho were about to receive from his hands. What the past could no longer do was define him, because the mercy of Jesus had proved greater than the worst chapter of his life. Then Jesus gave the sentence that interprets the entire encounter, and with it nearly the whole of Luke's Gospel. "For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost." Jesus had not wandered beneath that sycamore by chance. He was seeking the man hiding in it. Set side by side, the 2 Jericho stories reveal how wide that seeking reaches. On the road, Jesus gave sight to a blind beggar who owned nothing but a cloak, and in the city he brought salvation to a chief publican who had gained the world and lost his soul. The crowd could manage pity for the beggar far more easily than mercy for the tax collector, and in both stories the people standing nearest to Jesus proved the slowest to understand his heart. They approved of mercy when it looked respectable and murmured when it walked through the door of a man they despised. And that failure has never been confined to first-century Jericho. It remains possible to celebrate grace in principle and resent it in practice, to want Jesus to heal the people we pity while hesitating when he restores the people we blame. Zacchaeus also corrects the notion that grace deals softly with sin. Grace did not make him careless about what he had done. It made him honest about it for the first time in his life, and it broke the grip of the greed it refused to excuse. The proof of his changed heart was his eagerness to repair what he had damaged, which means the story speaks as directly to the people harmed by men like Zacchaeus as it does to the man himself. Forgiveness did not erase the debt of repair. Mercy made the repair possible. The timing deepens everything. Jesus was walking to Jerusalem with the cross drawing near, and the leaders watching him more closely with every mile. Yet he still stopped beneath one tree for one hated man, because seeking the lost was the very reason he was making the journey at all. Every act of mercy on that road points toward Calvary. He entered the house of a sinner in Jericho, because he would soon bear the sin of the world outside Jerusalem. And there is a shadow worth noticing in the scene itself. Zacchaeus climbed a tree to see Jesus, and Jesus was on his way to be lifted up on one to save men exactly like him. The story closes with a house transformed. Zacchaeus had come down quickly, received his guest joyfully, and stood before the Lord with the truth finally on his lips. And by evening, the home of the most despised man in Jericho had become the place where salvation was announced. That is what the seeking of the Son of Man accomplishes when it finds what it is looking for, and it reaches the whole of a life rather than a private corner of it, entering the rooms where a man keeps his money, makes his decisions, and faces the people he has wronged. Next time, the journey turns toward Bethany, where another sign will shake the region and harden the conflict gathering around Jesus. A friend of his named Lazarus will fall sick. 2 sisters will send for help, and Jesus will delay in a way that seems impossible to understand until he stands before a sealed tomb and calls a dead man by name. If Jesus could stop beneath a sycamore tree and bring salvation to the house of a man everyone despised, he can still reach the people we think are too far gone. He can still call the hidden, restore the guilty, and turn a house of greed into a house of grace. Just ask Zacchaeus.